For decades, everyone has been told to fear one fault line above all others, the San Andreas, the one that runs through Los Angeles and San Francisco and shows up in every disaster movie ever made about California. But scientists who actually study the West Coast's seismic hazards say the true monster isn't the fault most people picture it all. It's sitting offshore, hidden beneath the Pacific Ocean, largely invisible, and according to new research, it may not even be acting alone anymore. Today, we're breaking down why the next truly catastrophic earthquake on the American West Coast likely won't come from San Andreas, what the real threat actually is, and why new evidence suggests two of the most dangerous fault systems in North America might now be capable of triggering each other within minutes. And let's start with the fault almost nobody outside the Pacific Northwest thinks about, the Cascadia Subduction Zone. This is not a crack running through a city the way San Andreas is. It's a massive plate boundary sitting roughly 70 to 100 miles offshore, stretching about 600 miles from northern Vancouver Island in Canada down to Cape Mendocino in northern California. Along this boundary, an entire oceanic plate, the Juan de Fuca Plate, is being forced downward, or subducted, beneath the much larger North American plate. That single geological difference is what makes Cascadia so much more dangerous than San Andreas ever could be. San Andreas is what geologists call a strike-slip fault, meaning two plates are grinding sideways past each other. That kind of motion can absolutely produce devastating earthquakes, but there's a physical ceiling ON how large they can get, generally topping out somewhere around magnitude 8.2, maybe 8.3 under the worst possible conditions. Cascadia is an entirely different kind of monster. It's a subduction zone, the same category of fault responsible for the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and the 2011 Tohoku earthquake in Japan that killed nearly 16,000 people. Subduction zones can rupture along their entire length in a single event, which is exactly why they're capable of producing magnitude 9 earthquakes, roughly 30 times more energy released than anything San Andreas could ever generate. And Cascadia has done exactly that before. On the evening of January 26, 1700, the entire length of the subduction zone let go in a single massive rupture. Scientists estimate the magnitude at somewhere between 8.7 and 9.2, most likely right around 9.0. The shaking along the coast reportedly lasted 4 to 6 minutes, long enough that indigenous oral histories describe people being unable to stand and becoming seasick from the ground moving beneath them. The coastline dropped several feet, almost instantly, drowning entire forests in salt water and creating the eerie ghost forests of dead cedar trees you can still see standing along parts of the Washington and Oregon coast today. Here's the detail that lets scientists pin down the exact date with almost unsettling precision. That earthquake generated a massive tsunami that crossed the entire Pacific Ocean and struck the coast of Japan roughly 10 hours later in the middle of the night, with no earthquake ever felt locally. Japanese coastal villages recorded the mysterious flooding in written accounts at the time, and historians eventually nicknamed it the Orphan Tsunami, a wave with no apparent parent earthquake. It took nearly 300 years, and researchers cross-referencing Japanese records, tree ring data from the drowned Pacific Northwest forests, and native oral traditions, before scientists finally connected the dots and confirmed exactly when and how large that Cascadia rupture actually was. If you're finding this kind of deep dive genuinely interesting, go ahead and hit that like button. It really does help this reach more people who should probably know about this. What makes Cascadia even more unsettling is that 1700 wasn't a one-time event. Geologists have found physical evidence of at least 19 full-length ruptures along this fault over roughly the past 10,000 years, along with dozens of smaller partial ruptures affecting only portions of the zone. On average, a magnitude 9 or larger earthquake strikes this stretch of coastline somewhere between every 400 and 600 years, though the actual gaps recorded in the geologic record have ranged anywhere from 200 to over 1,000 years. It has now been more than 325 years since the last full rupture. Oregon's own State Emergency Management Office currently AG the entire time, with essentially nothing released. When Cascadia finally does rupture again, the consequences extend far beyond the shaking itself. Modeling from the Cascadia region. Earthquake Workgroup suggests that a full magnitude 9 event could produce a tsunami reaching heights of up to 100 feet in some low-lying coastal areas, arriving in as little as 15 to 30 minutes, far too fast for any conventional warning system to fully evacuate everyone in its path. New research published through the National Academy of Sciences adds another disturbing layer on top of that. The same earthquake that generates the tsunami would also cause the coastline itself to instantly sink by as much as 6.5 feet in the worst affected areas. Combine that sudden Subsidence with ongoing sea level rise, and researchers estimate the total area exposed to permanent flooding by the year 2100 could more than triple compared to what current maps show. Now here's where the story takes a turn that even seasoned seismologists didn't fully appreciate until very recently. For years, Cascadia and San Andreas were treated as two completely separate hazards, geographically close but mechanically unconnected. New research led by marine geologist Chris Goldfinger at Oregon State University is upending that assumption entirely. Goldfinger's team examined sediment cores pulled from roughly 3,100 years of ocean floor history along both fault systems, and they found something nobody expected: matching disturbance layers, suggesting that, on at least 3 separate occasions, Cascadia and San Andreas appear to have ruptured within minutes to hours of each other. The discovery itself came from what was originally a navigational accident. Back in 1999, during a research cruise meant to collect sediment specifically from the Cascadia Zone, Goldfinger's team drifted about 55 miles south of Cape Mendocino and ended up, almost by mistake, directly within the San Andreas Fault Zone instead. Rather than abandon the spot, they collected a core there anyway. Decades later, comparing that core against sediment layers from Cascadia itself, they found a telltale pattern: a coarse sediment layer immediately followed by a finer one, consistent with 2 separate fault ruptures happening in extremely close succession. Essentially, one earthquake seemingly triggering the next. According to Goldfinger, the most recent example of this synchronization appears to be the 1700 earthquake itself, with evidence suggesting the San Andreas segment near Cape Mendocino may have ruptured within minutes to hours of the massive Cascadia event. If that pattern holds and repeats in the future, it fundamentally changes what the next big one could actually look like. Instead of one devastating earthquake striking one region, emergency planners would potentially be facing 2 catastrophic ruptures occurring almost simultaneously, one offshore generating a massive tsunami across the entire Pacific Northwest coastline, and another striking Northern California's populated areas at nearly the same moment, stretching emergency resources across multiple states at once rather than concentrating them in a single response zone. To be clear, researchers are careful to point out this isn't a certainty for the next rupture, and it's only been documented a handful of times across 3,000 years of geologic record. But even a small probability of that kind of double disaster forces emergency. Planners in California, Oregon, and Washington to rethink assumptions that have shaped disaster preparedness for decades. Chris Goldfinger himself put it bluntly, saying, "We're used to hearing about Cascadia as this singular catastrophic event, when in reality, it turns out that isn't even the worst-case scenario researchers now have to plan around. If you want more grounded science coverage like this instead of vague clickbait headlines, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss the next one." None of this is meant to suggest San Andreas is somehow harmless, because it absolutely isn't. Beneath Los Angeles alone, a dense network of thrust faults remains capable of producing magnitude 6.5 to 7 earthquakes directly under 10 million residents, and the Hayward Fault running through the Bay Area is considered by many seismologists to be the single most urban, most dangerous fault line in the entire country, given how densely populated the surrounding region is. The San Jacinto Fault Zone alone has produced a magnitude 6 or larger earthquake roughly every 30 years on average, making it the most frequently active fault in the entire state. San Andreas earthquakes remain a very real, very serious threat that California has spent decades preparing for. But when people ask which fault is actually capable of producing the single most destructive earthquake scenario on the entire West Coast, the honest scientific answer increasingly points north, offshore, toward a fault most people have never even heard of. Cascadia doesn't get the same cultural attention as San Andreas. There's no famous Hollywood disaster movie built around it, no decades of pop culture reinforcing its name into public memory. And yet, it's the only fault in the continental United States capable of a true magnitude 9 earthquake. It's overdue by any historical measure researchers use, and new evidence now suggests it might not even rupture alone when it finally does go. The Pacific Northwest is home to major cities including Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver, along with countless coastal communities sitting directly in the tsunami inundation zone mapped out by emergency planners. Building codes across the region have been steadily tightening in recent years, specifically because of Cascadia risk, and emergency management agencies in Oregon and Washington continue running large-scale earthquake drills built entirely around a magnitude 9 Cascadia scenario rather than anything resembling a San Andreas event. So the next time someone brings up the big one, it's worth remembering that the fault most likely to earn that title isn't the one running visibly through California's most famous cities. It's the one sitting quietly offshore, largely out of sight, building pressure for the past 325 years. And now, according to the latest Research potentially connected to California's most infamous fault line in ways scientists are only just beginning to fully understand. Whatever happens next along the Pacific coastline, one thing researchers seem to agree on is this. The story of the West Coast's next major earthquake may not be a single fault story at all, but two of them acting together in ways we're only now starting to see clearly in the geologic record.